It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Paul Bruno. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Oh, glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Looking at your bio, what exactly do you do?
Well, I worked in the information technology field for about 30 years, and I left full-time employment about 8 years ago, and now I'm basically a consultant and an author. So I consult in the project management realm and information technology, but I'm also an author on history books, which we'll probably talk about. I kind of have a dual career or dual interests, business, information technology, project management, and history. And I do have an MA in history to go along with my other degrees in business. So that is why... that is kind of what I do at this point, and that is why I'm on your show to talk about the history side of my interests.
Okay. You know, it's funny. My father had a master's in history, and he ended up working for the federal government that had nothing to do with history. What does one do if you didn't have the other degrees? What would one do with a master's degree in history? Do you become a teacher?
You could, but you only can teach at the community college level and, K through 12. You need a PhD to teach at the college level, bachelor or more. Some people that get history degrees, MA or PhDs, also work at museums, and they'll also work in park services, like for the federal government, the National Park Service, and things of that nature. There's also a lot of history nonprofits out there. So sometimes people with history degrees will go on staff at a nonprofit like the American Battlefield Trust and help them with their history as part of their work.
All right. I just found it interesting because, he spent all this time at school getting a master's degree in history, and it served no purpose for him in terms of getting a job. So it was always sort of a joke for us, but... I guess it served you well, though, yeah?
Yes, it opened up the ability for me to learn, when I got the MA in history, how to read and write history at a higher level, and that's been very helpful in the books that I've written, the historical books I've written, with one of which we're going to talk about today. So I'm grateful that I went and got that, and I combined my business background and project management background in the first book, if I can mention it, Project Management and History, the first Jeep,
yeah.
And then just my historical background in the book we're going to talk about today, the original Jeeps.
Well, since you brought up the book, let's go there. What made you decide to write a book about Jeeps?
Yeah, what happened was about 20 years ago, I stumbled upon, while watching the big rigs of combat on the History Channel, Jeeps, because I lead an overly exciting life. It's unbelievable. Thrill a minute. And I'm watching this show on Jeeps, and they did this teaser that said the first Jeep was created by a bankrupt car company in Butler, Pennsylvania in the incredible time of 49 days. Go to commercial. And I watched after the commercial, I watched the story, and at the time I was beginning to write screenplays, and I said, this would make a great movie. I mean, it's all true. They took 49 days. They did this impossible. The company was bankrupt. And I started researching the story, and the more I researched the story, the more I fell in love with what I call early Jeep history, just the first couple years. And that was the genesis of my journey with early Jeep history for over 20 years. We weren't able to make the movie, so after about 10 years of trying that, about 10 or 12 years. So around 2011, I decided with my late wife to write a book about the story. And I did more research and found even more about the story, and that ended up being my first book, because I was in project management and history, the first Jeep, which focused on just the first one and built by the American Bantam Car Company. And then this year I decided, or last year going into this year, decided to write a history book that included all the information on the first one, but also brought in the other two Jeeps, the very first ones, the Willis Quad and the Ford Pygmy, that were also built in 1940, and kind of do an 80th anniversary celebration on how those three Jeeps were made. They were the very first three. And the competition between the three organizations, American Bantam Car Company, Willis Overland Motors, Inc., and Ford Motor Company, to get, to create their vehicles and also get contracts after their vehicles created. And the book goes into early 1941 of all that early Jeep history through what we call the Willis MA. So I was really looking forward to doing the 80th celebration and adding the material and making it a history book, taking out the project management stuff. It was another way to make the story accessible to people.
Okay, so you said the first Jeep was built in 1940?
Yes, it was built in 1940, and the second and third Jeeps, the Willis Quad and the Ford Pygmy, were also built in 1940.
What did they have during World War I then?
They had the mule and the horse. And
okay.
Exactly. And what happened was, as the 1930s went on, the Army knew that they had to replace the mule as the primary method of moving troops, small payloads, and weapons and any of that nature, because they found out how vulnerable they were, obviously, to machine guns and other things in World War I, and they needed the increased mobility. That was the driving need that ended up becoming the Jeep procurement. They were a little behind in the late 30s.
Well, I'm just thinking, because the films that I've seen of the First World War, I mean, they did have some kind of crude tanks, and they did have cars. It's just interesting that the Army didn't pick up on any of that until later. Well,
the cars used in World War I were very rudimentary, and the tanks were really beginning. They were invented during the war. But what happened was, after the war, in the 1920s, it was called the Peace Decade, and there wasn't a driving need to upgrade your military. And then what happened in the 30s, as Japan, Italy, and Germany became a threat, especially as the decade wore on, the Army knew they needed to upgrade, their materials. But what had happened was, this little thing was going on in the 1930s called the Great Depression, and there was no money. And so by the late 1930s, when they realized the threat of especially Germany, but also Japan, they were really, really far behind because of basically 20 years of not investing in research and development for all types of new weapons, including vehicles to provide more mobility.
So has the Jeep changed much? Because it doesn't look like it's changed that much, the Army Jeeps.
Yeah, what I like to say is, the Army Jeeps especially, but even the Jeeps on the road, that the DNA of a Jeep, of what these individuals did to create the first three ones, which is astonishing and amazing, has been in every Jeep that's ever made. So when I see Jeeps on the road today, and having my background and done all this research and writing on early Jeep history, and the three Jeeps that are on the cover of the original Jeeps book, their DNA and the people who built them, their DNA has gone down through 80 years of Jeep history to today. So there's probably differences in variation, obviously upgraded technology, but that versatility, that ability to go anywhere, that this vehicle can do anything, which was built into the first three, that survives in every Jeep that's been built and right up to today.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Love coffee, huh? But wait a minute. It seems like every time you finish a cup of coffee, you get all of these side effects along with it. Heartburn, indigestion, upset stomach, acid reflux. As the world's first and only organic acid-free coffee, Tyler's Coffee is able to provide a healthier option in the solution for more than 100 million individuals who have sensitive stomachs or suffer from acid-related modalities. This is Tyler's acid-free coffee. Coffee without the consequences.
Hi, this is John Morgan, production supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
So were the first Jeeps four-wheel drive?
Yes, they were, which was exceptionally revolutionary at the time and was one of the major technological obstacles for them to overcome. But they were all four-wheel drive with axles created by a special place, which we detail in the book, how the axles came about. Spicer Manufacturing in Toledo, Ohio. Fascinating detail on that critical component is included in the original Jeeps and in the first Jeeps.
So they were four-wheel drive. What kind of motor did they have?
Well, that's an interesting question. There was a real problem with the weight. So American Bantam and Ford went with a smaller engine, 40 horsepower. Bantam's was a Continental, hopefully I get this right, 104cc, doing that off the top of my head. But Willis, what they did, they had, and we detail this in the book, their own engine called the Go Devil engine, which was 60 horsepower, but it was heavier than those other engines, and they really struggled getting their weight to where the Army wanted it, but they're able to do it. And so that was a major difference between the three, where Willis had a more powerful engine in their vehicles, the Willis Quad, the MA, and eventually the MB, which was built for the war, which gave them a real advantage in the competition between the three. And Delmar Roos, who was the vice president in charge of engineering, he said when they designed their vehicle, he had never seen where having too much power was a problem. So they built more power into their particular one. So 40 horsepower engines in the other two, and then the 60 horsepower in the Willis.
It doesn't sound like much when you think about cars these days. You know, I don't think anybody would buy a 40 horsepower car. That wouldn't get up to freeway speed, would it?
Well, actually, the Bantam could do, because they were, lightweight. They weighed around 2,000 pounds, give or take. And the Bantam could do 50 miles an hour. They actually, when they were delivering it to Holabird, they got it up to over 50 miles per hour. And I think that was one of the qualifications that the Army wanted. So these things were small, compact, relatively lightweight, with a lot of power under the hood to do what they needed to do.
How necessary are those Jeeps these days? Because it seems like war is, I'm just going back in my head to the last sort of, the Iraq conflict or something like that. Are they still using those Jeeps? I mean, do they need them?
Well, the military replaced the Jeep with the Humvee.
With the Humvees,
and,
right. Okay.
Yeah, with the late 1980s. So the need for mobility to move troops is still there quickly, and so they used the Humvee. But what was amazing about the Jeep was it almost lasted 50 years of military service, which for a military vehicle is astonishing, because military equipment becomes obsolete relatively quickly. And that it was so well built, so well designed, and did what it was supposed to do so well, lasting over 50 years of military service, is a real testament to the Jeep as a vehicle and the ones that built them.
Were any of them built with hard tops, or were they all just open like that?
No, they were all open like that. They put tops on them afterwards, but the original three were built with no tops, per specs. Because that's the way I think the Army specified it. They didn't have tops on it or anything like that. Came a little later.
Did it have heat?
Not that I know of, but it could have. Be honest with that, that's probably a little beyond. I'd have to go look at the specifications. You would think, but given that they were open air, you'd be blowing heat on yourself in the cold, which would be good. So dress warmly would be the main thing if you were riding in one of the first 3 Jeeps and you were going cold.
Well, I had one of my first cars was a 72 Volkswagen Bug, and those were notoriously bad for having heat in the winter and notoriously great for having lots of heat in the summer. So I kind of, would drive with a blanket, and half the time it felt like the windows were open, but the heat was blowing. So you'd have, your ankles would be burnt, but your head and the rest of you would be freezing. So I didn't know if they had that same kind of setup in those Jeeps or not.
Yeah, I wouldn't know, from the early ones. All I know is they performed well for what the Army wanted them to do, which is a great thing.
So how many were made for World War II? Do you know that?
Yeah, actually I do. There was Willis built 330,000 for the war, and Ford built 277,000. So 600,000 Jeeps were produced for World War II. Bantam, which was frozen out of the contracts for the war, they eventually built just 2,673, I believe. So they produced a lot of Jeeps in the war that served around the world in all theaters.
Now, the company Jeep is not related to this, or is it?
It's the one that came after, okay? What happened it descended is the word I'm looking
Descended,
for.
okay.
Descended. It took me a while there, sir, to get to that one. What happened after the war was Willis decided to build Jeeps, and the Jeep name trademarked by them, so on and so forth. And over time, and this is detailed at the end of the book in the epilogue, Willis went out of business. The Jeep brand was bought by Kaiser. Kaiser was bought by AMC. AMC was bought by Chrysler. Chrysler turned into FCA, and now it's Stellantis. And the interesting thing about the Jeep brand, it's been owned by all these companies. Almost every 10 years it seems to change corporate ownership, but the Jeep brand and the Jeep legend continues underneath all those various corporate entities for 80 years.
I saw one of the newer ones earlier this year, and they're really starting to look more like Humvees now, aren't they?
Well, they're working in the SUV market, but the Jeep Wrangler, that's still the old style,
yeah.
All the way right back to those first 3 Jeeps we detail in the book. Rugged, let's go outdoors.
Well, I guess the last question is, do you own one?
I do not. I'm always honest about that. I love early Jeep history, but I'm more of an indoor person and not the rugged outdoors type. But that I don't feel disqualifies me for loving early Jeep history and writing about it as I have in both books. The original Jeeps, which just came out, in Project Management and History, the first Jeep. So I love early Jeep history. I love Jeeps in that regard, but hopefully I'm not disqualified because I don't own one.
Okay, I guess actually that brings up one more question. Is there a possibility that anybody could buy an early Jeep? I mean, do you see these things come up on eBay, or does the Army sell off the old ones, or are they pretty much museum pieces at this point?
There's a whole world of early Jeep, aficionados that work on early Jeeps. The ones that are most available are the Willis MB, if you're looking at World War II, and the Ford GPW, because those are the ones that were 600,000 and were built in the war. Okay, the original Ford Pygmy is actually in a museum in the very third Jeep ever built is in a museum in Alabama. I don't remember exactly the town. And the Bantam Pilot number 1 was destroyed, and the Willis Quad, I think, also was, if not destroyed, went into history. But the second version of the Willis model, what was called the Willis MA, they only built 1,500 of those, and there's about 27 of those that exist in the world. Bantam built 3 models, the Pilot, BRC-60, and the BRC-40. There's one BRC-60. It was the 7th Jeep ever built. That is in the Smithsonian in outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that's at the Heinz Museum in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's called Gramps. That's its nickname. And there's about 100 of what they call the BRC 40s that still exist. So they're out there for the people that have the interest and the knowledge. Obviously, the MAs and the BRCs, they're very expensive because they're very rare. Get a Willis MB or a Ford GPW, it'll cost you some money, but there are a good number of them still out there of the World War II variety that we're talking about.
Well, that's about everything anybody would ever want to know about a Jeep, I think. Your book is called The First Jeep?
Well, the current book is called The Original Jeeps.
The Original Jeeps.
And if I could just mention a couple things and where people can get it and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Original Jeeps, it's available at Amazon.com. It's in paperback only. We have a Facebook page, The Original Jeeps, if people want to go out there and explore early Jeep history. And we're actually encouraging people. I'm sharing stories from my family's World War II history out there. And so if anybody has a family story or a friend story, someone they knew that served in World War II and want to post their service out on our Facebook page, The Original Jeeps, they're more than welcome to do so. For people that listen to programs such as yours, we actually have autographed copies available, same price as Amazon, plus shipping, at this web address, dispatchermagazine.com/books. dispatchermagazine.com/books. Same price as Amazon plus shipping. Get an autographed copy from me. And our website is originaljeeps.com. All sorts of great history out there on early Jeep history, the first 2 years, 1941, at our website, originaljeeps.com.
Okay. Well, Paul, thanks so much for coming on and sharing all about Jeeps. Best of luck.
I thank you.
Are you going to write a part 2?
Well, it would actually be a part 3.
3.
Because,
okay.
as you were mentioning, I have the first Jeep book. Now I have the Original Jeeps. If I have it, there is enough material to do a third book of what happened in 1941. I don't know if I'm the man to do it or not. We'll just have to see what the future brings.
Okay. Well, we'll look forward to that if it ever happens. Take care. Nice talking to you. Thank you for